I'm just going to turn it over to you, Hank, and for any introductions and anything else you need to give us before we jump in.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk here again. I think that if you want to have the complete background for this follow-on Q&A, it would be good to watch the video from the Lunch and Learn. I'm not going to cover down on everything I talked in that now, but brief background is grew up in doing outdoors activities, went to the Naval Academy, became a Marine officer, and through the Marine Corps had lots of different security type responsibilities, as well as ended up doing some finance, and finally ended up in cyberspace operations, which included offense and defense. And then through that last assignment, I started studying more broadly what risks were to our dependencies on the internet and everything that is connected via the internet. And I realized those were fairly broad, and we should be doing things collectively to mitigate those risks. I do want to mention at the beginning of this, and I think I have a disclaimer in the video also, but any views here that I express are my own. They don't reflect anything from the U.S. government or from any of the companies I work for or have previously worked for. It's just based on my own research and my own opinions.
Well, I want to do, and part of this is a follow-up to the Lunch and Learn, but I think that's, so much has just changed from what we're just talking about. Like, we're a month ago in our Lunch and Learn, you're talking about, cyber warfare, and maybe there was a little bit of this thing hanging out there with COVID-19. And then, fast forward a month later, and it's like, the world is basically economically in a crisis, health-wise in a crisis. Like, there's just all this uncertainty and craziness that's going on. And I'm curious, from your perspective, I don't know if you're seeing things, I know we are, but how do you see if we go back to just cyber warfare, how do you see these maybe, criminals, nation states, whatever, how do you see them exploiting or starting to exploit our weaknesses? And is there anything that people need to be on the lookout for?
So there's a figure of the term called the sophisticated adversary. And so if you want to characterize people who are trying to take actions through cyberspace with a malevolent intent, that's where the term malware comes from, then there's different organizations that have characterized them as kind of tiered them and how serious they are, how good they are at their trade craft. And the ones of greatest concern are nation states and highly organized criminal activities that have a lot of resources. And sometimes the lines between those two become blurred because nation states can use criminals as proxies to try to achieve they can finance them, and they help that nation state achieve their means with some plausible deniability. And I talked about this in the Lunch and Learn, but if it's a sophisticated adversary, then they're going to apply warfare techniques, if you will. And one of those techniques is to attack targets at their weakest point, but also to time their attacks so that it's the most advantageous to them and the least advantageous to the target, if you will. And that could be in a physical attack, it could be in a cyber attack. And so I think that in any case where there's a disruption or a distraction, then an opportunist is going to try to take advantage of that timing to his or her, to achieve their own objectives. Mm-hmm. And I think you can see that in the news. There are people trying to scam other people out of their federal relief money already. Anything that's new, it's chaos, and there's a figure of speech. There's opportunity and chaos, and that's both for good people and bad. And so there's people who lack a conscience are not going to not use the situation to their advantage because of the pandemic. They will take full advantage of it, and there will not be a moral quandary on their side for it. So you can do your own research, but it's pretty obvious cyber attacks are up. There was a cyber attack against, I think, Health and Human Services a couple of weeks ago. To go back to some individuals having no moral quandary whatsoever. One of the very organizations that's trying to help people survive this gets a cyber attack. The smart thing, I'm not saying it's the right thing, but the smart thing for an attacker is if a target's distracted by something else, then defenses are down. They may be more willing to give up ransom or something like that. And you saw that. And I'm not saying nor do I know that there's any direct linkage, but after the shooting at the Pensacola Naval Station a few weeks ago, tragic as it was, the very next day, the city was under a cyber attack for ransomware, and I would suspect that the attacker timed that to coincide with those things. So the takeaway should be again, not looking at the causality. With the pandemic, there are lots of subjective observations people have that make all of us characterize the pandemic itself differently. Some people think it's more serious than others. What we should look at is the outcomes, and the outcomes are less difficult to characterize, and that is distracted leadership, distracted population, lots of new internet apertures being opened, lots of reconfiguration of systems. All of those things create opportunities to be exploited by an attacker. The last thing I'll say is we should consider that some of our potential attackers, they're not being affected the same way that we are. Right. So they may be better positioned to act at some time when we're weakest, and they have recovered, or maybe have not been affected yet. Either way, but that's the time. Yeah. And so, as difficult as it would be for our financial institutions or our utility grid to come under attack on any given day from a sophisticated adversary, it would be much more difficult when everybody's working from home. Many people who protect the internet are not at their workstations right now, etc. Most people have probably heard of using computer hygiene. So virtually, you're being careful about the ways that you can conduct yourself online. You don't go someplace that you may suspect is dirty, if you will. And so just as we've increased our hygiene in the physical world right now because of the pandemic, we should be doing the same thing in some of the new and unknown territory, if you will, of all these reconfigured systems. And I would second the limiting your apertures. I think that every time you connect something to your home network, you should consider where it has been and how it might be able to transfer data or load software onto your system. All of those things can be utilized to your disadvantage, and you should not discount that a computer attack can come to you from a physical sense. There are lots of ploys to use social engineering or otherwise. A free CD or a free USB or a cord or all these different things. Everything should be authenticated, and then I would just minimize the introduction of new things. New seems neat sometimes, but maybe it's not absolutely necessary when we're trying to be cautious.
Well, one of the things that we've done, or I've done, at my home from the beginning, I do have a lot of different devices, but I have a separate network where all those kind of IoT devices, to the extent that they can be, so home security camera, any of that stuff is all isolated from my regular network, and as well as my work network. So it's a little easier for me to do than the average person. But a lot of the technology out there today from companies have made it pretty easy to set up, at least a guest or a second kind of wireless network, if you will, to connect some of these devices to. So if you do have, Amazon devices and cameras, if that is something you have, it would be important to keep them off the normal network that you're also connecting to your work computer and all that stuff too. Or, if you have a work computer and your company provides you with a work phone, consider using the Wi-Fi off your phone instead of using the Wi-Fi at your house. That's another thing that we tell people that a lot when it comes to going to hotspots. Like, don't go to Starbucks or the airport and connect. Just use your phone. And so it's kind of the same thing. If you don't feel like you have to use what Hank said, a super clean cyber hygiene at your home, then just avoid it. Disconnect from it and use your mobile device to connect.